Alright, this was not originally going to be a video, but just another written document like the last one. However, I decided to change my mind and put this in video format, as I feel my points could be stressed a lot more in a video. With that out of the way, let me explain what this video is about. This is a follow-up video to a document I made a while ago about Supernova Cosmo, and why I believe he is not worthy of being a top 10. I decided to update that document with some more points I noticed, and explain how this further exacerbates my ranking of Cosmo. First of all, something I want to get out of the way immediately. I am in no way calling Cosmo a bad or underwhelming Uber. My point isn't to expose him as the evil Dr. Capitalism, even though he is. My point is to explain that he isn't able to keep up with the rest of the top 10 Ubers. I'd personally rank him somewhere within the top 15. Now, first of all, what exactly are the top 10? Well, I don't own every Uber in Xskull's top 10, so I can't go off of that, but I do own these 6 other Ubers, which are all arguably the best Uber in the game, with a massive Reddit post being made about how each one can be considered as such. They're also all number 7 or higher in Xskull's tier list. Okay, now we can discuss Cosmo's build and how I believe it fails to compete with the rest of these Ubers. The main reasons I discussed in the previous document are his force swing, his tendency to miss, and his TBA. For one, I am aware that he does not miss very often, especially with the new Omnistrike. However, it is still definitely possible for him to miss, and it's extremely devastating when he does so, due to his TBA being over 20 seconds long. No other Uber in the top 10 is this reliant on a single attack landing, with the exception of Laslos. But even his TBA is shorter than Cosmo's at around 16 seconds. This TBA creates a huge downtime in attacks, and his highest potential burst damage is dwarfed by Laslos, who doesn't see this issue as much because of his damage. Cosmo has the lowest DPS in these 6, and the only one that comes close is Dark Fanoa, who also has slow versus every enemy in the game, as well as being much more consistent of a generalist. Cosmo needs to put in more effort and time than the other 6, and while he may work in more stages than most of the others, in stages where you can use the others, Cosmo is very often a worse pick compared to them. Now, those were the main points in my last document that I still agree with. It's time to move on to the newer points for this video, and there's one main point that I've noticed, which is very rarely discussed but still incredibly important. His synergy with other Ubers. This is where Xskull's methodology and my methodology differ drastically. Xskull only uses one Uber at a time per stage, while I and many others use multiple. Before I get into detail about how this affects Cosmo, let me explain why my methodology is like this. Getting a specific Uber in this game is a rather unlikely event to happen. You need to usually wait for a guaranteed of that event, which even then grants only around a 9.1% chance of getting that Uber if you assume the set has 11 Ubers, which most sets currently do. This is why most sources rank Ubers alone, as it's unlikely you have another Uber that directly outclasses it. However, something that needs to be considered is that the Battle Cats is a very long game, and there is not one singular player in the endgame who has only one Uber in possession. You're going to get more Ubers, and the odds of getting a top tier one is also very likely. I got Dark Castle, Fanoa, Balrog, and Cosmo himself by sheer chance through just playing the game. And another thing you need to consider is seed tracking, which a very large portion of endgame players do. They're likely to go for the best Ubers first, for obvious reasons. Because of this, it is not at all an absurd claim to assume that players have other top-tier Ubers in the endgame, and players are also going to likely use them with other Ubers. However, even with seed tracking in mind, it's to be assumed that the casual player doesn't have every single Uber in the game, and the Ubers they're missing depends exclusively on RNG, and it gets so complicated that there is no one tier list that can work for every player, and the only completely accurate solution is to abandon tier lists altogether. But that's way too communist for my tastes, so my methodology is this. Synergy with other Ubers in general should be considered, but Ubers outright replacing or outclassing specific others should not. This is the closest I can get to a fully accurate tier list for everyone. Now we can get to how synergy affects Cosmo. As I just said, synergy is a very important aspect to consider when ranking Ubers in the late game, and all of these 6 Ubers either directly benefit other Ubers or are benefited by other Ubers. Cosmo is an exception to this. He does not benefit other Ubers, nor is he improved by other Ubers. His build is designed for him and him only. As a matter of fact, his performance is arguably worse when you throw other Ubers in with the occasion. Let me explain something I noted when playing Baron Seal. I was using a loadout that had 2 other LD Ubers, Fanoa and Alias. Cosmo was primarily a counterpick to the Angelic Glories. What happened is that Cosmo's double knockback wave and long freeze made it so that both of the other Ubers were unable to capitalize off of Cosmo's hit. The double knockback brought them to safety, and the freeze kept them there. This allowed a third one to slip through before the other 2 could die, and it cost me the run. On paper, Cosmo seems like he would only help with his 3 crowd control abilities that are extended with a wave attack. But as we've learned from communism, working in theory does not equate to working in practice. As I've said, Cosmo's build is designed purely for himself, and synergy is an important thing to consider when ranking Ubers. In a solo list, I can understand placing him around the top 10, but when taking other Ubers into mind, he's not able to keep up with the crowd, and quickly gets pushed out of the top 10. And one last point that's less of a reason for Cosmo, and more of a rebuttal for Xskull's video about him. The main one is that these 3 stages he brought up are very cherry-picked. Dojo's Stage 12-3 and Baby's First are nowhere on here, despite usually being considered on a similar difficulty level as Heinous Road, and at the very least Bunaglios. Cosmo was also specifically designed to counter Socrates, so of course he'll work there. These are not the only stages that are difficult in endgame. Plenty of other stages in ZL, like Smooth Docking and Beyond the Hadal, are still difficult even for endgame players. There's also the 2 other Brutal Advents, and even the Barons. The only one of these stages where Cosmo works is the Barons. He doesn't work in 12-3, Baby's First, Smooth Docking, Beyond the Hadal, or the Brutal Advents. While he still does work in a very large portion of stages, he doesn't work in every stage. And as I've said earlier, there are quite often much more effective options in the stages that he does work in. Oh, and one last point, just use Octo is not the only advice you should use for wave attacks. There are loads of enemies who outrange and counter Octo and can easily pierce in huge damage to Cosmo and any other non-wave immune Uber. Now, that's the main point I want to discuss with why I believe Cosmo isn't able to compete with the top 10. One last thing I want to mention is that once again, these 7 Ubers are all in debate for which one is the best, so I'd like to give my 2 cents on where each one would rank considering synergy, especially because that's my main thesis for this video. Unlike Cosmo, I actually do believe that these ones are of similar qualities, and would not put any Ubers between them. This is basically my personal top 6. Number 6, Lasvos. This is mainly for having a few more of the weaknesses that Cosmo has, but he makes up for it with extremely high peak potential, and having some good synergy with other Ubers. Number 5, Fanoa. He's very powerful on his own, with incredible damage and range. The reason he's down so low is because his synergy with other Ubers is arguably even worse than Lasvos's. Not at all bad synergy, but could be improved. Number 4, Izanagi. An incredible single-target attacker, with the only weaknesses being inherent by this type of unit. Synergizes great with other Ubers, and can even hold his own gray with his spirit. Number 3, Dark Fanoa. Quite possibly the best Uber for the single Uber tier list. Incredible crowd control, great damage, and a build that can work in every stage, with amazing synergy potential. The only reason he's not higher is because the synergy with the next 2 have is completely unmatched. Number 2, Balrog. Phenomenal synergy with other Ubers and ridiculous damage, both per second and per hit. On top of that, an incredibly cheap cost and the shortest cooldown of any true form Uber in the game. Absolutely insane. And number 1, it's still Dastly. The guaranteed permanent curse against every enemy boosts her synergy potentials miles ahead of any other Uber, on top of it having incredible DPS. You can match her with any Uber in the game, and that Uber will become much, much better with her. The only flaw with her synergy is that you have to be a little more careful against counter surge units, but that isn't even close to evening her unmatched synergy potential. And just for fun, I believe you can rank Bahamut anywhere from just under Balrog to even above Ghastly, but I'll put him just above Balrog. I know he's not an Uber, which is why he doesn't count all that much. And with that done, I feel like I need to stress again, I'm not calling Cosmo a bad Uber. I'm simply saying he isn't able to compete amongst the top 10, let alone the top 7, or 6 in this case. I'd personally put him at a high S tier in the top 15, around number 14 to number 12. I can understand if you think he is top 10, but I value synergy heavily when discussing Ubers, and his synergy is flawed to say the least. Perhaps in a way, we are all a little like Cosmo, and in this video essay, I will explain how Supernova Cosmo is actually a scathing critique of a post-capitalist America. Okay, that's all the Battle Cut stuff I wanted to talk about. If that's all you're interested in, you can click off the video now. The rest of this is just going to be channel updates for recurring viewers of my content. In the last video, I mentioned how I was making a video dedicated to New, and progress on that has been slow, to say the least. I've barely gone anywhere in the run. I'm not as familiar with that game as I am with other fan games like Syndek or Home. I'm not abandoning it altogether, but don't expect me to get it done within the week. That's about all I wanted to discuss. See you guys when the video releases.